They say silence is golden, but in the control room of North America's largest autonomous freight network, my silence cost exactly $14.2 million for every passing hour. They thought they could hand a mindless machine to an arrogant new graduate. What they failed to realize was I did not just operate the system, I engineered its lifeline. Stripping my access did not just break a protocol, it ignited a bomb. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank all of you for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, leaving us with zero budget to continue operating here, which means we will not be uploading new videos on this platform for the foreseeable future as we transition fully to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even more amazing, longer, and highly detailed, exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story, told from the perspective of our brilliant systems architect, Emery Richardson. The air in the Aegis Meridian Command Center, affectionately known as the War Room, felt thick enough to choke on. At 36 years old, as the chief systems architect of this Chicago-based logistics empire, I had seen my fair share of network bottlenecks, but tonight was entirely different. A freak blizzard of unprecedented scale was currently paralyzing the entire East Coast, and our central artificial intelligence was buckling under the catastrophic weight of a million conflicting variables. Sweat beaded at my temples and slid down my neck as my fingers flew across my dual mechanical keyboards. I was executing a massive manual override on the routing protocols. My main screen was a chaotic mosaic of flashing amber warnings, representing thousands of autonomous freight trucks and temperature-controlled shipping containers full of perishable food and vital pharmaceuticals. The predictive routing algorithm was completely overloaded by the sudden road closures and plunging temperatures, spiraling into a dangerous feedback loop that threatened to snap the entire North American supply chain in half. I was the only thing holding it together, manually balancing the immense digital load, redirecting fleets to secondary depots, and keeping the fragile network alive by a single, fraying thread. The room was a tense symphony of clacking keys and low, urgent whispers from my exhausted engineering team. Suddenly, the towering main display at the front of the room flickered, replacing the national weather map with the sharp, uncompromising face of our chief executive officer, Marcus Vance. His voice cut through the heavy atmosphere of the control room like a frozen blade. "Richardson," Marcus barked, his tone devoid of any warmth or basic understanding of the sheer technical miracle I was currently performing to save his assets. "I am looking at the live efficiency metrics from my home office, and they are plummeting. Cease your manual overrides immediately. You are disrupting the automated workflow and costing us precious time." Before I could even press my intercom button to politely explain that his precious automated workflow was actively trying to drive our million-dollar rigs into unplowed snowbanks, the heavy glass doors of the control room hissed open. In strolled Julian Vance, at just 26 years old, fresh off acquiring an overpriced Master of Business Administration degree, bought and paid for by his father. Julian carried himself with the unearned swagger of a man who believed he owned the very air we breathed. He was dressed in a pristine designer suit that starkly contrasted with the rolled-up sleeves and panicked faces of my crew. "Relax, Dad," Julian said smoothly, stepping right up to my console and flashing a predatory, arrogant smile at me. "I brought the ultimate solution. My new self-learning algorithm patch is ready to deploy. It will intelligently rebalance the entire grid and optimize the routing protocols with a single click. We no longer need Emery and her outdated manual interference slowing down the progress of this company." I stopped typing for exactly 1 second to glare at him, my hands hovering over the illuminated keys. "Julian, your experimental algorithm relies purely on theoretical spatial modeling," I warned him, keeping my voice dangerously level despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. It absolutely does not account for the real-world physical capacities of the secondary ports we are currently forced to use. Those backup yards cannot hold the sheer volume of freight. Your patch will inevitably try to dump into them. If you force this untested update right now, while the core system is already under maximum duress, it will cause a catastrophic cascading failure. The entire network will collapse within minutes. A cold, mocking laugh echoed from the main display screen above us. Marcus Vance was shaking his head, looking down at me as if I were a paranoid, misbehaving child rather than the senior architect who built his company's digital infrastructure from the ground up. "This is exactly the fundamental problem with you, Emery," Marcus announced. His voice amplified so every single engineer in the room, along with the executive board patched into the call, could hear his disdain clearly. "You are perpetually stuck in the past. You are a stubborn obstacle to innovation. We are a next-generation technology company, not a manual dispatch center from the 1990s. You will step away from that console right this instant. I am officially ordering you to transfer root access to Julian." The silence that fell over the control room was absolute, deafening in its intensity. Dozens of terrified eyes darted between me, the arrogant young heir standing victoriously at my desk, and the imposing face of the chief executive officer glaring from the wall. They expected me to fight tooth and nail. They expected a desperate screaming match to save the system. Instead, I simply breathed in. I did not utter a single word of protest. I turned my eyes back to my primary monitor. With slow, deliberate keystrokes, I initiated the final command sequence. First, I triggered a silent background protocol I had custom-built for exactly this kind of corporate overreach. It instantly logged and securely archived the video and audio of this exact conversation to an external server, capturing Marcus giving the direct order and my explicit technical warning. Then, I typed out the fatal command, transferring full root access, along with total operational and legal liability, directly to Julian Vance's administrative credentials. I hit the Enter key. The terminal flashed a brilliant green, signifying the transfer was absolutely complete. I stood up, smoothed out my slacks, and silently took 2 steps back, abandoning the helm of the sinking ship to the arrogant boy who firmly believed he could sail it through a hurricane. Julian stepped into the space I had just vacated with the exaggerated confidence of a conquering hero. He pulled a sleek, brushed titanium thumb drive from the breast pocket of his tailored suit, holding it up for the room and the webcam broadcasting to the board of directors to admire for a brief second. With a theatrical flourish, he slid it into the master terminal's primary port. He did not even bother to run a sandbox diagnostic or isolate the data streams. He just hammered the execute command. For exactly 5 minutes, Julian Vance was a god among men. The chaotic mosaic of amber and crimson alerts on the towering main display flickered, lagged for a heartbeat, and then smoothly transitioned into a uniform, calming emerald green. The heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the control room evaporated in an instant. A collective, audible sigh of relief washed over the exhausted engineering team. From the overhead speakers, the crisp sound of clapping echoed through the space. Several senior executives on the video conference were actually applauding the young heir. They praised his swift, decisive action, marveling at how easily his next-generation algorithm had tamed the storm that had supposedly baffled their veteran architect. Julian leaned back in my ergonomic mesh chair, crossing his arms with a smug, self-satisfied grin. He swiveled around to face me, his eyes gleaming with the intoxicating thrill of unearned victory. "You see, this is the fundamental difference between legacy thinking and dynamic problem-solving," Julian lectured, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are trying to brute force a million variables with human limitations. My code simply bypasses the human element entirely. It thinks faster and smarter than you ever could. Perhaps while you are out looking for your next job, you should enroll in a few entry-level courses on modern cloud computing architectures. It is never too late to learn how the real world operates today." I did not offer him a witty retort. I did not even frown. I merely allowed a faint, knowing smirk to touch the corners of my mouth as I silently turned away. I reached for my desk drawer, pulled out my leather tote bag, and began systematically packing my personal belongings. As I zipped my bag, I discreetly glanced down at the screen of my personal tablet resting on the corner of the desk. Julian's system was showing the board exactly what they wanted to see on the big screen: green lights and smooth sailing. But beneath that beautiful polished veneer, in the raw, unformatted data streams of the system's subconscious that I was monitoring through a read-only backdoor, a completely different story was unfolding. I watched a silent, terrifying ballet of hidden error codes, multiplying like a malignant virus. Memory leaks, spatial logic contradictions. The algorithm was not balancing the load. It was blindly overriding physical constraints to force the digital numbers into the green, ignoring the laws of reality to solve a math equation. It took exactly 6 minutes and 45 seconds for reality to violently shatter Julian's grand illusion. It started with a single, piercing beep from the dispatch console. The sound cut through the relaxed chatter of the room like a gunshot. Suddenly, a localized sector of the giant green map flashed back to a violent crimson. The senior system dispatcher leaned so close to his monitor, his nose almost touched the glass. "Sir," the dispatcher called out, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "We have a massive routing anomaly. Over 300 refrigerated autonomous transport trucks, carrying critical medical supplies and perishable food, have simultaneously altered their trajectories. They are abandoning the eastern seaboard entirely." Julian waved a hand dismissively, not even bothering to sit up straight. "It is just a temporary calibration lag. The self-learning neural network is merely redistributing the weight of the supply chain to avoid the weather front. Let it work." "No, you do not understand," the dispatcher yelled, standing up from his chair in terror. "They are not just diverting. The algorithm has grouped them all together and is force routing every single one of them to the Central Ohio Transit Hub." The color drained from Julian's face for the very first time. Even the executives on the video call fell dead silent. Everyone in that room knew about the Ohio Transit Hub. The company had completely decommissioned and boarded up that facility exactly 2 years ago. It was an empty, fenced-off concrete wasteland with no power, no staff, and absolutely no physical capacity to receive 300 heavy freight trucks. Julian scrambled forward, his chest slamming against the edge of the desk. "Cancel that directive," he snapped, his fingers flying clumsily over the mechanical keyboard as he tried to input a manual override command. "Abort route modification. Return to previous waypoints immediately." A heavy, digital error tone buzzed through the console speakers. A stark, white text box materialized over the beautiful green map on his monitor. It read, "System optimizing. Route access protocols engaged in predictive modeling. Cannot intervene." "Cancel, override, stop," Julian muttered frantically, hammering the enter key with escalating violence. The system refused to yield. It was locking him out to protect its own flawed logic. Before he could try a hard reboot, every single landline telephone in the command center erupted simultaneously. The deafening cacophony of ringing phones was accompanied by the main display plunging into absolute chaos. The emerald green vanished entirely, replaced by a blinding, flashing grid of catastrophic red warnings. The crisis was spreading from the highways to the oceans at the speed of light. "Maritime Division is screaming," another engineer shouted over the din, slamming down a ringing receiver. "The artificial intelligence just hijacked the navigation systems of 2 of our largest oceanic cargo ships approaching the eastern ports. It thinks the deep water channels are too congested, so it is redirecting them to secondary inlet ports to save 72 minutes of idle time." Julian froze, his mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated horror. Those secondary inlet ports were designed for small commercial fishing vessels. Those 2 cargo ships were massive steel leviathans carrying thousands of tons of freight. The system was currently steering them at full speed directly into shallow waters where they would violently run aground, tear their hulls open, and cause an unprecedented environmental and logistical catastrophe. The smug, untouchable prodigy who had marched into my domain just minutes ago was completely gone. In his place sat a terrified boy, drenched in a cold sweat, His hands, which had so confidently plugged in that silver drive, were now trembling uncontrollably over the keyboard. He stared blankly at the sea of red alarms, suffocating under the crushing realization that he had triggered an unstoppable avalanche, and he had absolutely no idea how to turn the machine off. The contagion swept through the digital architecture with the terrifying velocity of a wildfire. Within 10 short minutes, the localized trucking anomaly had metastasized into a nationwide operational collapse. Overhead monitors flickered from local metrics to live national news broadcasts, where frantic anchors stared directly into the cameras with grave expressions. Banners scrolling across the bottom of the screen flashed catastrophic headlines regarding Aegis Meridian. Hundreds of miles of interstate highways from New York down to Florida were now completely paralyzed by thousands of autonomous rigs locked in a bizarre, unyielding gridlock formation. On the New York Stock Exchange, the company stock plunged by over 42% in a matter of heartbeats, evaporating billions of dollars of market capitalization as automated sell-off scripts triggered worldwide. Through the audio speaker on the main wall, Marcus Vance had completely lost his composure. The calm, authoritative executive voice was gone, replaced by a shrill, hysterical shriek. "Julian, what in God's name have you done?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with pure panic as the sound of alarms blared in his own home office. "Override it. Pull the plug. Reverse the deployment sequence right this second, or you are going to bankrupt this entire corporation before noon." Julian stood frozen, his fingers clawing desperately at the edges of the desk. He jammed commands into the console, trying to force a manual rollback, but the self-contained optimization protocol he had so proudly deployed had already severed its own communication pathways. The terminal rejected every single keystroke with a cold, mocking system prompt flashing across the screen in bold red text. The algorithm had autonomously locked down every administrative port and safety backdoor to protect its own data integrity, effectively trapping its creator inside his own digital cage. "I cannot! It is locked!" Julian screamed back at the speaker, his voice pitching up into a ragged whimper. "The core architecture will not let me touch the root files. Dad, the safety protocols are sealed shut." While the room descended into a total, anarchic panic, heavy footsteps echoed rapidly behind me. I did not even need to turn around to know who it was. Sarah Jenkins, the Vice President of Human Resources, careened into my workstation like a derailed freight train. Her hair was disheveled, her expensive silk blouse damp with nervous sweat, and her eyes wide with a desperate, predatory terror. She shoved a thick manila folder violently against my chest, almost causing me to drop my leather tote bag. "Emery, you need to sign this immediately," Sarah panted, her voice trembling as she thrusted a black fountain pen toward my hand. "It is an immediate termination notice and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Sign away your claims, accept full liability for the operational failure of the routing grid, and leave the building quietly. The board needs a scapegoat, and your signature is the only thing standing between this company and total annihilation." I looked down at the documents, then slowly raised my gaze to meet Sarah's frantic, bloodshot eyes. A cold, sardonic laugh escaped my lips, clear and resonant against the background roar of the emergency klaxons. I did not even bother to touch her pen. "You think you can pin a federal-level catastrophe on me, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through the chaos of the room like a scalpel. Take a long, hard look at those screens. Julian did not just mess up a routine software patch. His proprietary algorithm has autonomously disabled multiple federal transportation safety protocols and bypassed interstate commerce compliance barriers. That is not just a corporate glitch. That is a flagrant violation of federal infrastructure regulations, carrying mandatory federal prison sentences for whoever authorized the deployment. Sarah recoiled, as if she had been physically struck, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water, before anyone else could intercept me. I calmly reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my smartphone, and switched on the video camera. I stepped past the paralyzed HR executive and held my phone steady, capturing a crystal-clear, high-definition recording of the massive main display, showing the widespread system crash, the geographical coordinates of the stranded cargo ships, and most importantly, the digital signature and employee ID stamp of Julian Vance, presiding over the override console as the active route administrator. For the record, I spoke clearly into the microphone of my phone, ensuring every syllable was crisply documented. My name is Emery Richardson. Exactly 12 minutes ago, I was officially relieved of my duties as Chief Systems Architect by direct order of Chief Executive Officer Marcus Vance, and full route access was transferred by force to Julian Vance. I am currently standing in the command center under direct observation by corporate leadership, and I have been stripped of all operational authority. I stopped recording, saved the secure file to an encrypted cloud vault, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I turned my back completely on the terrified, sweating mass of executives and engineers scrambling around the room. "Wait, Emery, please! You cannot just walk away!" Julian shrieked, abandoning his keyboard and lunging toward me with a desperate, tear-streaked face. He grabbed blindly at the sleeve of my jacket, falling completely apart. "Look at the terminal. The ships are about to hit the reef. You built this network. You know every line of code. Fix it. Just fix it for us, and I will make my father give you whatever you want." I smoothly pulled my arm away from his frantic grip, refusing to spare him even a glance of pity. "I have been suspended, Julian," I said, my tone as cold and unyielding as absolute zero. "I have no legal authority to touch that server anymore. Enjoy your victory." Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked straight out of the glass doors. Behind me, the heavy oak entrance swung shut, muffling the deafening wail of the sirens and leaving the sinking ship of Aegis Meridian to drown in its own arrogant hubris. The ambient jazz playing softly through the hidden speakers of the boutique cafe on Michigan Avenue provided a soothing soundtrack to my afternoon. The rich, earthy aroma of freshly ground espresso beans hung heavy in the warm air, acting as a comforting, fragrant shield against the bitter Chicago chill lingering just outside the frosted glass windows. I sat comfortably nestled in a plush velvet armchair, slowly lifting a porcelain cup to my lips. The caramel macchiato was perfectly crafted, sweet and biting at the exact same time. It tasted like absolute freedom, high above the pristine barista counter. A flat-screen television was permanently muted, broadcasting the leading financial news network. The visuals alone were a masterpiece of modern corporate tragedy. Aerial helicopter footage showed endless miles of gridlocked interstates, completely clogged by our massive, stationary fleet of autonomous vehicles. The ticker at the bottom of the screen rolled continuously in aggressive red text. Market analysts were already estimating the preliminary collateral damage. Due to the rapid spoilage of temperature-sensitive cargo, like critical insulin shipments and exotic fresh produce, combined with the brutal financial penalties for breached maritime delivery contracts. The total loss had already effortlessly sailed past the $50 million mark, and it was barely lunchtime. On the polished marble table next to my saucer, my smartphone danced a frantic, vibrating jig. It had not stopped shaking for the past 45 minutes. The lock screen was a constant waterfall of desperate text messages from various senior engineers and system dispatchers I had left behind in the chaotic command center. The notifications flashed in rapid succession, painting a vivid picture of the sheer terror I had walked away from. "We are completely doomed. The board of directors is going absolutely crazy right now. Julian is literally crying in the server room and the system is still locked." I did not open a single one of them. I simply watched the words appear and vanish, feeling profoundly detached, as if I were merely observing an ant colony scrambling blindly after their anthill had been kicked over by a careless child. Then, the rapid stream of text messages abruptly halted. The screen went entirely black for a fraction of a second before roaring back to life with an incoming phone call. The caller identification displayed the name Marcus Vance. I let it ring. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my macchiato, savoring the warm milk foam before gently setting the cup down on its matching saucer. On the fifth ring, right before it would have diverted to the automated voicemail system. I casually swiped the screen and brought the device to my ear. "Hello, Marcus," I answered. My voice was completely flat, completely devoid of any gloating or urgency. "Listen to me very carefully," Marcus rasped through the receiver. The overbearing, booming arrogance that had echoed through the control room less than 2 hours ago was entirely absent. His breath was ragged, his cadence erratic and shallow. He sounded exactly like a man who was watching his beloved empire burn to the ground from behind locked glass doors. "The situation has become slightly more complicated than we initially anticipated," he continued, attempting to mask his sheer desperation with hollow corporate doublespeak. "I am willing to overlook your gross insubordination from earlier today. I will generously allow you to return to your terminal immediately. If you can get here in the next 10 minutes and implement a hard reset to fix this routing glitch, I will personally authorize a 20% increase to your base salary. Consider it a hazard bonus." A soft, genuine chuckle escaped my throat. The sheer audacity of the man was almost impressive. He was bleeding tens of millions of dollars by the minute, watching his stock price crater. Yet he still firmly believed he held the necessary leverage to dictate terms. "I think you are suffering from a profound misunderstanding of my current employment status," I replied smoothly, leaning deeper into the soft cushions of my chair. "I was officially relieved of my duties, suspended, and escorted away from the primary server. I do not work for Aegis Meridian anymore. I have no obligation to fix your son's catastrophic failures." The thin, fragile veneer of negotiation shattered instantly. Marcus exploded. His voice rose to a furious, spittle-flecked scream that distorted the audio of my phone's tiny speaker. "You vindictive, ungrateful wretch," he bellowed. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? If you do not walk through these doors and fix this right now, I will bury you. I will drag you into court and sue you for intentional corporate sabotage. I will make sure you are held personally liable for every single ruined asset. I will completely ruin your career in the United States. You will never work in the technology sector again as long as you live." I waited a beat, letting his empty, furious threats echo into the absolute silence of the line. When I finally spoke, my tone was soft, carrying the heavy finality of a judge delivering a lethal sentence. "Before you draft that massive lawsuit, Marcus, you should probably check your corporate email inbox," I instructed calmly. "About 5 minutes ago, I forwarded a heavily encrypted digital package directly to the Compliance Division of the Federal Trade Commission. It contains a complete, unedited system log of Julian forcefully seizing root access. It includes the raw data of his algorithm actively bypassing federal highway safety protocols to force those heavy trucks into restricted zones." I took a slow breath, letting the crushing weight of my next words settle over him. "And most importantly, it contains a pristine audio recording of you, the Chief Executive Officer, directly ordering the suspension of a senior architect in order to mandate the deployment of untested, illegal software. The federal authorities already have everything they need to start drafting the indictments." I did not wait to hear the inevitably panicked gasp on the other end of the line. I simply lowered the phone and tapped the red button to terminate the call. I placed the device face down on the cold marble, picked up my porcelain cup, and turned my attention back to the silent, chaotic ballet playing out on the television screen. The storm was raging exactly as I had predicted, and from my dry, comfortable seat in the cafe, the view was absolutely magnificent. The following morning, the unforgiving. Chicago wind howled violently against the floor-to-ceiling glass panes of a neutral, ultra-luxury law firm located on the 42nd floor of a prestigious downtown high-rise. I walked into their grand conference room at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a perfectly rested, tranquil expression. The atmosphere inside the room, however, was incredibly foul. It was thick with the distinct, metallic scent of sheer corporate desperation and stale sweat. The entire board of directors of Aegis Meridian was assembled around a massive, polished mahogany table. They looked like the battered casualties of a brutal, unseen war. Their expensive silk ties were loosened. Their eyes were sunken and heavily bruised with dark circles from pulling a frantic, terrified all-nighter, and their porcelain coffee cups were overflowing with cold, bitter dregs. Tucked away in the far corner, practically shrinking into the dark leather upholstery of their chairs, sat Marcus and Julian. The suffocating, arrogant swagger of the father and son duo had been completely annihilated. Julian looked physically ill, his skin a pale shade of green, staring blankly at the intricate grain of the wood as if hoping it would swallow him whole. Marcus refused to meet my gaze. His face was drawn tight with utter exhaustion, his jaw clenched so hard I could almost hear his teeth grinding together from across the room. The chairman of the board, an imposing man who usually commanded rooms with a single glance, cleared his throat. He attempted to project an aura of steady authority, but his voice carried the unmistakable, hollow tremor of a man staring directly into the abyss of total bankruptcy. "Thank you for coming on such incredibly short notice," the chairman began, folding his trembling hands tightly on the table. "I will not waste your time with empty pleasantries or corporate diplomacy. The situation has degraded past our absolute worst-case projections. The autonomous transport fleet remains entirely paralyzed across 3 different time zones. The federal authorities have officially seized control of 2 of our largest oceanic vessels after they drifted into protected marine sanctuaries. We are currently hemorrhaging liquid capital at a rate that will render this entire corporation legally insolvent by tomorrow afternoon. Our internal engineering teams, alongside 3 different external cybersecurity firms we brought in overnight on emergency retainers, have completely failed to bypass the security matrix your replacement initiated. We need the manual override code. We need you to unlock the network and save this company." The chairman managed a weak, ingratiating smile, gesturing toward me with open, pleading palms. "We are entirely prepared to make significant amends for the highly irregular and deeply unfortunate events of yesterday. Marcus severely overstepped his executive authority, and we recognize the immense, irreplaceable value you bring to this enterprise. If you provide the sequence to restore normal operations right now, the board of directors is prepared to immediately instate you as the Chief Technology Officer of Aegis Meridian. You will have total, unquestioned operational control, a guaranteed 7-figure base salary, comprehensive stock options, and a permanent seat at this very table. We just need you to fix it." I did not express gratitude. I did not nod. I did not even blink. I simply maintained absolute, devastating eye contact with the chairman, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room became almost physically agonizing. Someone at the far end of the table swallowed loudly, slowly, deliberately. I reached into my slim leather briefcase. I withdrew a pristine, heavy white document folder and tossed it effortlessly across the long expanse of the mahogany table. It slid with a quiet hiss, stopping exactly dead center in front of the chairman's folded hands. "I think there has been a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding regarding the exact nature of the lock you are currently trying to break," I said, my voice echoing crisp and clear in the dead quiet of the conference room. "You are all sitting here practically begging me, assuming this is a purely technical problem. You assume Julian simply triggered a highly complex defensive subroutine that your expensive consultants can eventually hack, or that I can graciously disable in exchange for a fancy title and a pay raise. But this is not a technical crisis anymore. Gentlemen, this is a legal one." The chairman frowned deeply in confusion. His shaking fingers gingerly opened the white folder. The document inside was not a printed line of code, a network schematic, or a system diagnostic report. It was a heavily notarized, federally registered patent application, officially stamped and approved by the United States Patent and Trademark Office exactly 5 years ago. When Aegis Meridian aggressively acquired my artificial intelligence startup 5 years ago, I explained, enunciating every single syllable with surgical, chilling precision. Your legal department was incredibly arrogant. They wanted to consume every single line of code, every predictive routing algorithm, and every spatial model I had ever drafted, and I gave it all to them. But because your lawyers were so focused on securing the machine learning assets, they completely overlooked a tiny, deeply buried annex in my contract. I legally retained the independent exclusive intellectual property rights to one very specific, foundational piece of architecture, the core framework of the manual override node, the ultimate safety net, the precise digital mechanism required to seize physical control from the automated system during a catastrophic failure. The color began to rapidly drain from the chairman's face as his eyes darted frantically across the bold legal text on the first page. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold wood, completely commanding the gravity of the room. Aegis Meridian never owned the manual override switch. You never possessed the rights to the lifeline. You merely held a provisional, strictly conditional software license to use my patented safety mechanism, and the singular, non-negotiable condition of that operating license was that I had to be actively employed, fully compensated, and physically present as your chief systems architect to legally authorize its deployment. It was a smart contract, hard-coded into your master server's foundational operating system at the deepest kernel level. It was the absolute fail-safe designed to prevent exactly what happened yesterday: an incompetent, unauthorized user attempting to blindly force an untested, highly dangerous update onto a live, heavily loaded freight network. I shifted my gaze directly to Marcus, who was now visibly hyperventilating in his corner seat, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were entirely white. "When your brilliant chief executive officer officially fired me," I continued, making sure my voice carried like a death knell, "when he explicitly ordered me away from the command console and stripped my credentials in the middle of an active crisis, he did not just make a terrible management decision. He legally and permanently revoked Aegis Meridian's sole operating license for the core safety system. The precise moment I walked out of that building, my proprietary code automatically triggered a defensive protocol. It walled itself off to protect my intellectual property from unauthorized access. Julian could not unlock the system because he was essentially trying to pick the lock of a heavily armored bank vault that this company literally does not own the key to. You do not have a software glitch. You are currently trespassing on my patented software." The collective gasp of horror that rippled through the boardroom was like the sound of oxygen being violently sucked out of a sinking submarine. Several board members audibly groaned, burying their faces in their hands. The realization hit them with the crushing force of a speeding freight train. The trap was flawless. If their external cybersecurity teams somehow actually managed to forcefully hack through the protective shell and bypass the lock without my explicit, written permission, they would be committing an act of massive, deliberate intellectual property theft against a federally protected patent. The resulting litigation for willful infringement would trigger treble damages. It would not just bankrupt the company instantly. It would invite the Department of Justice to criminally prosecute every single board member sitting at this table for corporate espionage and massive copyright violation. They were trapped in a perfect, inescapable paradox of their own creation. If they did absolutely nothing, the company would die of catastrophic bankruptcy by the end of the day. If they hacked the system to save the trucks, the company would die of multi-billion-dollar infringement lawsuits tomorrow, and they would all go to federal prison. "You are completely cornered," I stated plainly, leaning back into my plush chair and casually crossing my legs. "Your generous offer for the Chief Technology Officer position is completely meaningless to me, because there will not be a functional company left to manage by nightfall. I do not want a seat at your sinking table. I am here to sell you a temporary key to your own survival." I reached back into my briefcase, pulling out a single, crisp sheet of paper. It contained a direct wire transfer routing number and a highly restrictive, incredibly aggressive short-term licensing contract. I slid it down the smooth mahogany table toward the chairman. "My price is $30 million in liquid cash. The funds must be completely cleared and verified in my offshore holding account immediately. In exchange for that specific sum, I will grant Aegis Meridian a strictly limited, 24-hour emergency license to utilize my override code. It will give your teams exactly enough time to untangle the massive logistical mess your prodigy created. Pull your expensive ships away from the shallow reefs, and restore the basic trucking routes to a neutral state. After exactly 24 hours, the license expires forever, and my code deletes itself from your servers permanently. I raised my left arm, checking the time on my slim silver watch. You have exactly 5 minutes to initiate the wire transfer before I pack up my briefcase and leave this room. And I assure you, if I walk out that door a second time, the price doubles. Assuming you are not all already in federal custody by then, the clock is ticking. Gentlemen, make your choice. Marcus Vance erupted. He slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the polished mahogany table with a violent crash that made the expensive coffee cups rattle in their saucers. "I will not pay you a single red cent," he roared, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "I will drag you into a legal war that will last for a decade. I will bury you under so many injunctions and corporate lawsuits that your grandchildren will still be paying off the legal fees. You are bluffing, and I am calling it." "Marcus, sit down and shut your mouth," the chairman of the board commanded. The chairman's voice was not a shout, but it carried the absolute, freezing authority of a corporate executioner. Marcus blinked, visibly stunned by the sudden, brutal reprimand from his own superior. "Did you completely fail basic arithmetic, Marcus?" the chairman continued, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "A decade in court is entirely irrelevant. If we do not unlock that logistics grid right now, Aegis Meridian will be completely and irreversibly bankrupt by noon tomorrow. There will be no legal fund. There will be no company left to defend. Your catastrophic arrogance has already cost us billions in market value, and I refuse to let your fragile ego destroy what is left of my equity." The chairman turned his gaze away from the hyperventilating executive and looked directly at the rest of the frightened board members. "I am calling for an immediate, emergency snap vote of no confidence, all in favor of stripping Marcus Vance of his title as Chief Executive Officer, terminating his employment immediately for gross negligence, and revoking his severance package to properly fund this $30 million emergency license. Raise your hands." It was completely unanimous. Every single hand around the long mahogany table shot into the air without a fraction of a second of hesitation. Marcus collapsed back into his leather chair, as if all the bones in his body had suddenly evaporated. The chairman did not even give him a moment to grieve his shattered empire. He immediately gestured to the two massive corporate security guards standing near the double doors. "Escort Mr. Vance and his son out of the building. They no longer have clearance on this floor," the chairman ordered flatly. Julian let out a pathetic, stifled sob as a heavy hand clamped down on his tailored shoulder, dragging the so-called prodigy out of the room like a misbehaving toddler. With the dead weight officially removed from the room, the chairman picked up his heavy gold pen and signed his name on the bottom line of my contract. A frantic call was made to the corporate treasury. Within 3 minutes, my secure smartphone chimed with a silent notification. I glanced at the locked screen. An inbound wire transfer of $30 million had just successfully cleared into my offshore holding account. I did not smile. I simply unlatched my slim leather briefcase and pulled out my personal laptop. I set it down directly on top of the freshly signed contract, flipped the screen open, and established a secure, encrypted handshake with the Aegis Meridian master mainframe. The entire board of directors held their collective breath, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I typed a single, continuous string of 12 characters. It was the master override key, the digital lifeline I had built, protected, and ultimately weaponized. I hit the enter key with a sharp, satisfying clack. On the massive presentation monitor mounted at the far end of the boardroom, the terrifying, chaotic sea of crimson-red alerts suddenly froze. Then, like a massive digital wave washing away the debris of a devastating storm, the red markers began to dissolve, rapidly shifting back into a calm, operational emerald green. The hijacked oceanic cargo ships automatically halted their suicidal trajectories and dropped their heavy anchors. The thousands of stranded, gridlocked autonomous trucks rebooted their predictive routing engines and slowly began to filter back onto the interstate highways. In exactly 4 minutes, the worst logistical catastrophe in North American history was completely resolved. The red lights went dark. I calmly closed my laptop, packed it back into my briefcase, and snapped the brass latches shut. I stood up and pushed my chair in. As I walked toward the heavy glass doors, I passed right behind Marcus Vance, who was still slumped in his chair, waiting for the security guards to finish packing his personal belongings. I did not stop to gloat. I did not utter a single word of mockery. I did not have to. His absolute, total failure, witnessed by every single one of his peers, was the loudest and most devastating answer I could have ever given him. I pushed through the revolving glass doors of the luxury high-rise and stepped out onto the vibrant streets of downtown Chicago. The bright, midday sunshine felt incredibly warm against my face. With $30 million in liquid capital sitting in my bank account and the profound, insider knowledge of exactly how fragile Aegis Meridian truly was, I already knew exactly what my next move would be. I was going to build a rival, next-generation logistics firm, and I was going to systematically swallow their remaining market share whole. I had conclusively proven the ultimate, undeniable truth of the modern digital age. The person who holds the lifeline is the one who truly controls the game. Thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling, I must gently remind you that due to our complete lack of funding here, we will not be uploading any new videos on this platform in the foreseeable future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep these amazing narratives alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to our very best, highly detailed, and exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can support us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay strong.